when I record.
Yep. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the October 11th, 2023 meeting of SIG-Auth. Let's get started. So, can everybody see the agenda? Sufficiently large. Awesome. All right. First item. All right. So, the TL role. So, if you recall, we have TL roles and chair roles for SIG-Auth. I've been a TL for I think 6 years now, almost coming up, and I think it would be a good time to shuffle up the TLs. So I am stepping down as TL. I will uh, be nominating Mo as my replacement TL. So that brings the TLs to be Jordan, David Eads, and Mo, assuming everyone's happy with that. I think the next steps for me are I will follow up with an email thread to the list, and we'll give it a couple of weeks. And if the lazy consensus chooses Mo, which I think is a great choice, we can proceed with making that official. So um, I am still going to be chair for the time being, so I will still be attending meetings. But I think Mo has been doing a good job of keeping up with the technical stuff and the caps and going forward. I think we can make that a more official um, responsibility that Mo has. So, congrats, Mo.
Yay, more work. Thanks.
Like most, well, not like most things. Like I think we actually do a good job of saying like you're doing the job. Let's recognize that. So I don't actually even know that it is more work. I think you're already doing the work.
That's good. But yes, thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Moving on then. Okay, so first item is secret source CSI controller split discussion continued.
I think you missed the announcements.
Oh, yeah, you're right. 15 working days until code freeze, 10/31.
Winter is coming.
Put it on your calendar.
It is on my calendar. It's multiple times on my calendar in a desperate attempt not to forget it.
All right, polls of note.
So I put this on here mostly in case anybody has comments or feedback, but as all of us that work for cloud providers are well aware, HTTP2 is bad. It was a mistake. We shouldn't have done it, but here we are, and it's deployed everywhere. And so there was a recent patch to XNet / the HTTP2 bundle in Go that tries to mitigate a recent DOS vulnerability. Sadly, it doesn't work like at all for us. It is still trivial to basically nuke a API server off the internet in seconds. So
it's necessary but not sufficient. Like it deals with things on a single connection, but you can still open multiple connections, and with the default limits, exhaust stuff.
Yep. So this is an attempt to make it so that if you're an unauthenticated attacker, you basically can't do anything of important of note. And if you're authenticated, we still try really hard to prevent you from doing things. But yeah, so like Jordan's looked at it, Antonio's looked at it. I'm still working on finishing up the tests, and I'm going to clean up some code comments because they are confusing in the way I wrote them in my tired mind when I was writing them. But yeah, I just wanted to bring this up. Also, if you happen to be responsible for Kubernetes, probably should apply this patch to your environments.
So the plan is to get this cleaned up, tested, have a way to opt out of some of the things it does in case there are unforeseen side effects, but then take it back to supported branches with the mitigations in place, with an opt out just in case there's a side effect we don't catch in review.
Will the
Does
pieces
adding
be
the header?
independently?
So,
I'm-
David,
Will the
Alright, go
pieces
ahead.
be independently opt-outable, or will it be all or nothing? I'm thinking specifically about the defense from anonymous users, which is pretty clear and gated, versus the detection of is early HTTP reset, which affects, if I read it correctly, all connections.
Yeah, so if I can make it separate right now, it's the same. If you want it separate, I'll make it separate. It's not actually, it's 2 feature gates, 3. I can make it 3 feature gates if you really want.
I don't see a need for all 3, but I think I see a distinction between. But I do see a distinction between I've messed something up for just anonymous users. Okay, I feel a little bit bad for them. Versus, well, now I've messed things up for authenticated users, and that's kind of bad.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll split it up so that you can skip the mitigation for anonymous versus or authenticated versus non-authenticated, basically.
Thanks. It looked good to me. Otherwise,
Yeah, 2 things. The first is, what does adding connection close actually do? Does something deeper in the HTTP2 handling and go on the server side force that, or is that just a hint to clients?
That is a magic header that the HTTP2 and HTTP1 libraries understand to mean tear down the connection. So it is not actually
On the server side?
yes.
on the server side.
Okay. And in that case, what about L7 load balancers?
It also goes to the load balancer. So the client receives this as well, and it's an instruction to the client, but it's not just trusting the client to tear down the connection.
Uh-huh.
It
Well, I'm
goes-
just saying behind a load balancer, you're going to have anonymous requests and authenticated requests on a single HTTP connection, presumably. Generally, client to backend connections through an L7 load balancer are not one-to-one, right? So
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, so this would tear down connections maybe more quickly than you desire. Yeah, so
yeah, and not knowing much about the CVE other than that it exists, is this something that could be handled at a load balancer instead of, is there any sort of mitigation at a L7 load balancer that could be put in place where Kubernetes API server would not have to worry about this? Or
yeah, so if you have like an Envoy and stuff, it can provide some mitigation. The real issue comes in like, so at L4, it's really hard to do good mitigations because you don't have context for what you're mitigating.
Mhm.
Whereas at L7, you can do basically whatever you want. Like if the client that you're talking to is authenticated versus not, right? So that gives you a pretty strong indication of like, is this a bad actor versus just a misbehaving client?
Yeah.
So I mean, if it ends up being that we need to retain those feature gates to give people the ability to opt out of it, we can just keep them. So yeah, but you are right. Like an L7 proxy in front of this could make it more complicated depending on how the L7 proxy is making those backend connections.
It would be good to capture some of these considerations in the descriptions of the fix for people who are trying to weigh whether they're vulnerable or whether their load balancer proxy is able to mitigate for them, and whether these mitigations would actually cause problems for a load balancer that had already mitigated the attack and now is being disrupted by its connection getting closed kind of randomly. Anyway, the more we can document the considerations, the better.
Cool. I can leave a comment later. Awesome. Thanks for raising that. How soon are we going to land this, and what is the plan for the backporting if there is a plan? Or how soon are we attempting to land this?
I'm depending on how many meetings I have left for this day. I might get it done by today in a state that somebody could review it. But not let's aim nominally for this week, merged and backported. The backport shouldn't be bad because the change isn't large. Like there might be conflicts, but
it backports clean to all levels.
Yeah,
currently.
these are pretty slow moving areas.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does break at 124.
Okay.
We don't support that in upstream anymore.
123 breaks at 123.
Okay.
So,
All right. Okay. Moving on. The secret store, CSI driver sync secrets.
Nish, I'm going to hand this off to you.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with my laptop. So if I go off, it's because my laptop crashed. I was already off for 2 minutes. So we discussed this in few of the SIG-Auth meetings before, like just to give a high level context. Today we have the secret sync feature in the CSI driver, and we've been discussing about removing it from the CSI driver because it's tied to the mount process today, and we're basically proposing coming up with a new controller that will only sync as Kubernetes secrets, reusing some of like the driver provider interface and all the other components that we have already built with the CSI driver today. So basically in this proposal, what we have is we want to develop a controller and then we also are talking about introducing a new custom resource called a secret sync class, in which a user would define what the name of the Kubernetes secret would be, and then what type of Kubernetes secret they want. And then in addition to that, they would basically define like key value pairs, where the key is saying like, hey, I want the secret key to be this, and then the value is what they reference today in secret provider class. And what the controller would do is essentially it'll look up the secrets in class, and then it would reuse the existing the proto API, so the gRPC calls that we have today that the driver makes to the provider to fetch the secrets that's available in external vaults. So like key vault, secrets manager. So we have like 4 supported providers today and like more in the works. It would essentially go and fetch those secrets from the external vaults and then sync them as Kubernetes secret. And the plan is once this controller is available as a standalone project, we want to remove the feature that is there in the CSI driver. Like we would basically do a 2.0 or like come up with a deprecation plan so that it goes away from the CSI driver. And then tell users that like if they only want to mount the secrets in the pods, then they use the CSI driver. And if they have a scenario where they need to sync as Kubernetes secret, then they would use the new controller project. And both these projects would live under SIG-Auth as a sub-project. So the last time we discussed, we didn't have the implementation details in here. So like now we've spent some time adding the details on how we want to implement it and around the migration story and also like what the new custom resources would look like. So we're basically looking for like feedback on if this is the right way to do it. And also in terms of like getting a sign off so that like we can do the actual work and then basically create a new repo under Kubernetes SIGs to host this controller project.
This is tangential, but maybe 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with some people from Vault who were building like exactly this, but just for Vault. So I may look up their details and send them your way.
Yeah, that'll be great. Like today, we also have Vault as a supported provider for the project, and then like we've been having discussions with them, basically as an opt-in for the controller design too. And I think we've been getting good feedback. But yeah.
trying to see in the doc which pieces are different or additional than just an extraction of the current stuff.
So basically, the proposal is the one that talks about us going and implementing. So like the section that I think Mike has now, that's the section that talks about implementing a new controller.
Mhm.
So the implementation wise, the new one is the controller. We will reuse all the existing providers, like basically like they already have containers. So we will reuse them without any additional changes. And then in that proposal, we also talk about introducing a new custom resource for called secret sync class.
And the custom resource has fields in it that would be confidential fields.
Yeah, I think
is
right.
Is the key, maybe I'm misreading. The key is not like an encryption key. The key is like a data key in the secret.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's no.
Jordan, your comment, the secret sync object does not contain secrets in it.
Yes.
It is the intent of having a Kubernetes secret made.
I saw key and my brain.
Yeah,
said,
it's a map key, not secret key.
Yep. Even though it says secret key. You're hurting my poor brain. Yep. That makes me feel better. The RBAC permissions, the existing secret sync functionality also had to have RBAC permission to write secrets, right?
Mhm.
The existing one is bad, so bad.
Okay.
One thing I do want to bring up that's not obvious is the existing one runs as a daemon set, meaning it runs on all your kubelets and basically indirectly grants all of your kubelets full read access on all secrets on the cluster.
Yeah.
Basically turns off node isolation.
Okay. It would be helpful to highlight the delta between the current RBAC permissions and the RBAC permissions this would need. If this doesn't need any additional RBAC permissions on secrets, then the current built-in controller, and it is no longer running on every node, but you could run it centrally or on a control plane node or something like that. It would just be helpful to see what the delta between the current approach and the new approach. Right now it says security concerns associated with the introduction of the controller, and it reads as if everything in that list is new permissions for the controller approach that don't exist for the embedded approach. So.
Okay.
And one thing I want to mention is we haven't built anything yet, so we don't know if it'll work, but one of the things we are exploring is a way to like rely really heavily on like server-side apply and basically give up some of the very quick feedback loops that Kubernetes has, and instead basically not grant the controller any level of read access on secrets at all. Just only give it patch basically, and it will sit there and do the thing, but it won't ever be able to get the thing.
So it could only create by name. It could only update.
It would just apply and ask the server, please figure it out. Like, this is what I expect to be there. And, you know, it'll have to keep some bookkeeping in its class for like what it thinks like it synced.
I mean, you can apply an empty manifest and get back the current content of the thing. So I don't think it's accurate to say we're not giving it read access. Like,
oh, I didn't know you would get back the content. That's awful. Why would we do that? I mean, I know
so you know what you wrote.
I know. Now I think about it. Damn it, you're messing me up, guys. Can I have a way of not giving it that?
Not that I know of. The other thing is that without the ability to do a targeted list watch, you're stuck with periodically just doing a blind write, which
you're stuck with that anyway, David. Remember, you don't know what the state of your provider is. You're stuck resyncing every so often anyway.
I would have thought that the provider would have to accept a give me the current state, but that if you had a list watch, you'd be able to say, I don't need to write to cube, so I can spare the
Yes.
cycle.
Yeah. So so the way we would do that is we could do bookkeeping on the custom resource to say, last time I synced, I stored like a secret that had this hash. And so like if that didn't change, I won't bother bugging Cube about it. So you can do the bookkeeping elsewhere basically and not hammer the API.
Okay.
Yeah, we maintain state today in the CSI driver similar to that. Like today on every rotation, basically we get the newer contents from the provider and then we do a diff to see if what we wrote last time and if anything is changed, and only if it is
What
changed.
you wrote is not the same as what is there. So if you wrote it and somebody else modified it, is it the responsibility of this controller to keep it in sync or not?
Basically only on the rotation interval. Well, actually, maybe not even then. Yeah, I think in this case, I would say no. Don't mess with the thing. It won't fix it.
Okay, that sounds a little bit weird, but I guess it
I know.
avoid the issue. We found switching to apply, that was one of our problems. We had some people who switched blindly, and blind writes, while not overly expensive, are more expensive than just a list watch.
Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah, I will investigate if we can do anything. So like there's already language in the design about using cell admission policy to, like, for example, like never allow this controller to like make a service account type secret because it has no business doing that. So I'll see if we can come up with further ways to like limit what it can write basically. Like for example, we could probably prevent it from sending like an empty data key, like empty data through. So that way it can't try to echo, maybe.
I don't think you can.
Can you not detect that at admission time?
Admission only handles create and update events. Patches get transformed into
Update.
updates by taking the existing object, applying the patch, and then running the result through admission and saying, do you allow this update? So the fact that it was a patch is, I think, visible, but the content of the patch is not visible to admission. All it sees is the final updated state of the object.
But we could detect at admission time that nothing changed.
Yes.
And then purposely say, no, you can't have the content.
But that means the blind write would get returned as a failure if it was a no-op. I don't know. There's more to think through here. I'm not sure you're going to be successful in letting something write without reading at all.
But we can try, Jordan. This might be the first one. But yeah. But at the end of the day, though, having a controller that you can run somewhere else than every single kubelet, or maybe even off cluster, is better than every single kubelet can read and write all secrets. I think we can all agree to that.
Yeah, it sounds like we already have this problem, and I would say that we know that secrets are a painful API to build this type of system on, and depending on your requirements, this functionality may be useful. So it seems sufficiently different from what the core secret store, I guess not the core, the original secret store CSI driver set out to do. So it seems to make sense to have that be a separate project. Yeah, so seems like a good idea to break that functionality out. All right, then what would the next steps be for this? I would say, since it is kind of just a breakout, does it need a design review from SIG-Auth, or do we just say we have some existing code that we want to run in a new separate process? Let's create the repo. or do we want to go through the whole
Is,
API
is
design review?
the CRD and API net new?
Yeah, it
The
is.
API sounds like it.
Okay.
Yeah, so my intent was not tomorrow, but 2 weeks from tomorrow, to ask folks to bring this to you, Jordan, for an API review.
Okay. 2 weeks. Yeah, we'll see if there's stuff. If we're slammed for 129 stuff, we might preempt it to be after 129. But if we have time, 2 weeks from now, it's fine.
Cool. Let's do that then. Moving on. So expanding kubelet credential providers.
Yeah,
Let's
so I
hear
see
it.
some various folks from SIG-Node are here because I briefly brought this up in a previous SIG-Node meeting. So welcome all, Mike, Peter, and I see I think others. You should come more often, then you can like complain at us for whatever we broke. But so the gist is, I would like to make it possible to use a bound service account token as a form of workload identity that is then used to authenticate and effectively authorize a workload to pull its image from some registry, right? This would allow me to not have any image pull tokens anywhere, and instead just have ephemeral tokens that bind to a cloud identity in some mechanism. And that cloud identity is assigned some policy, or I mean, and I'm using cloud sort of like in just a generic sense. It could just be some other system that you have. And so now you're not managing credentials. Instead, you're managing identities and policy, which I think are what people want to do. Let's see, I don't see Michael on the call, but I know on the right side, he had commented that I think 2 years ago, Michael had a design around this, but then no, David, I will not build your kubelet API server. I don't want to do that. Actually, I don't even know what that means really. So there is a design from like a while back. What I wanted to get feedback from folks is, are there any high-level concerns? Is there any specific requirements for such a feature if it exists? I think my biggest concerns from the design that Michael had brought up a couple of years ago was that it was asking for changes to both pod and the service account APIs. That made me nervous. And it does go through the kubelet credential provider. And I don't know what the story is on cloud providers for letting a customer configure that. And I don't necessarily want to build a solution that prevents a customer from using a registry that isn't their cloud provider's registry. If that makes sense.
It makes sense. I guess there's two types of extensions right now for this that are being used by cloud providers. One is via configuration of the container runtimes, and the other is, you know, based on the destination of the image, usually not by user ID or anything like that. And the other is there's a Docker keyring set of tooling that's embedded in kubelet that can be extended and chip modified by cloud providers. And they do to add their own set of authentications that are valid to the end of the pod, you know, image pull secrets. If you want to go through that code, we could, but I think we really just need to come up with a design here and decide, is this what you want to do? You want to do it in kubelet and then pass the bearer token? That seems fair. Or do you want to pass the some kind of other identification down and then let the container runtime do the all of the access connections?
David, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was gonna say we came up with a similar need in OpenShift to be able to say, I have an image, I also have a pod. I need to know the service account of that pod so I can get a bound token for them to submit it because they've requested that I do that, or because I know I should do that. It wasn't clear to me whether that should be a thing that they specifically request, in which case, like, where would the extension go? Would it be kubelet code, or would it be some sort of plugin in your mind?
Yeah, so in the OpenShift registry case, that infrastructure is built with like Kubernetes in mind and is sort of directly integrated. For better or for worse, the cloud provider integrations I'm aware of require an STS where you take the service account token, exchange it for a cloud provider identity, and then that cloud provider identity has the access to actually pull the secret from the registry. And that's where like some of the not so pleasant changes come in, which is in order to do that STS, you need more metadata than what's available in the service account token. Like for example, like an OAuth client ID. So we had to have a place to put that, and it gets kind of messy at that point.
Okay.
I think for us, we could get it with, like, speaking about GK, the cube token is enough for us, but we need a custom audience set on it.
I see. So you're saying that just having a service account token, you like maybe you would look up something in the Kubernetes API or otherwise have an internal map somewhere?
Yeah, I would think. I'm not quite sure how it would work. Knowing that just the service account name should be enough, assuming that our credential plugin can, like, we will, if we piggyback on kubelet's access to the API server by stealing like its credentials, which we do a lot, that should be enough for us to get a token we can use to do exchange.
So how would you like, so for example, nothing prevents someone from mapping one service account to more than one identity. How would you know which identity to get?
In our system, we make you choose one Google service account. But also we have ways to not require that.
Yeah. Didn't we do this something very similar for CSI drivers?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so CSI drivers let you specify at the CSI driver level, here's all the audiences I want. Give me all the tokens for all of those. And basically all of them show up. But also, Anish, correct me if I'm wrong here, there's something in the pod YAML, right? There is a place in the pod YAML where you can specify extra metadata that's just handed to the CSI driver. And that's where we give it client ID, right? So that's where like the extra information is getting funneled in to do like the STS exchange.
Well, step one is just getting a token with audiences. Could we do that in the credential provider config?
Yeah, totally. So we could totally have a mechanism that is very much all you can ask when a credential provider runs it, or in its config, you could totally say, hey, whenever you call me, I want you to pre-provision a token for this audience that represents me for the workload that you're about to ask me to do stuff for, and pass it through in some way and all that jazz. So like we could make that work, and then we would basically be left with, well, what if the credential provider needs something more than the token and the audience to figure out what to do?
Yeah, I mean, presumably it can have its own config file somewhere. It is a host process, right?
Yes.
I think the question is if it needed something more that varied per pod.
Yeah.
Varied per pod.
Yeah.
Right.
Because each workload is likely to be a different client ID or a different identity in your cloud infrastructure. So it's at least a one-to-one mapping between service account and random identity on your cloud provider. And I think this is where like Michael's design basically had like, oh, I'll have this extra metadata in pod and service account. I think modifying like possibly the two most core APIs to Kubernetes isn't necessarily something I would want to do lightly. Even in a benign way, I feel like I feel like people should stop messing with pod. So,
yeah, that is where we configure image secret pulls though today. So
I mean, the credential provider config in the kubelet is where we can say for this set of image registries, here's how you get credentials for them. Augmenting that to have parity with the CSI driver ability to get tokens doesn't seem bad to me, especially if it's audience scoped. So the main difference I see there is that the credentials we spit back from this, that the kubelet will use to pull images, those images then become resident on the node. So this was linked in the topic, but like the ability to keep an image from being pulled on the authority of one service account's credentials and then used for other pods. Like that's a problem we already have today. I don't really want to make it worse. So yeah, it's linked to the SIG node.
yeah, so I think any
Worse
form of
how,
hashing.
though.
Sorry.
So you're able to pull an image today. You're able to prevent its reuse with image pull always today. If someone were to create an image pull secret with this, the same image would be pulled. That would be the workaround today. How is this worse?
It's automatic and hidden. You don't realize that the image is being pulled because of one service account's permissions and then used by another one. But the pull secrets, it's explicit and it's like, oh, I provided these credentials. They're sitting there. That's why this pod worked and that pod didn't. Or that's where the credentials came from. If it's buried inside credential provider config and it's happening automatically, I think it's harder to understand the leaks that you're getting.
So you're saying like if there was a resolution that just had on the pod said, use my service account token, that would resolve that because it would be public.
It would be public. It would be, I would say that's closer to parity with what we have today.
Yeah, I'm going through and thinking about like, so it's not that they're actually there. It's the visibility through the API to say what credentials were accessible. Because even image pull secrets are not guaranteed to be used; they're guaranteed to be accessible, right?
Yeah, I am curious what the trajectory of the cap of 2535 is. Is that active or on hold, or did it hit blockers that we don't know how to get around? Maybe no one on this call knows. I don't know.
I think Mike, didn't you work on this one? The insured post cap?
Yes. Yeah, we just updated it to support persistence. With regard to what you guys are talking about, we do record the authorization that was successful in pulling the image originally. And if it doesn't match up for this particular next pod, we force the pull on that in that case. Okay. So I think we've got the scenario you're talking about covered. As long as the response coming back from the image pool is, includes the authentication that was used.
Is that used as part of like a cache key, basically? Okay, so we would just need to
We put a SHA. We basically put a SHA around the pod YAML information that's interesting in this area, in the secret whatnot, right? And then remember that, and if a couple of hours go by, then we'll force you to pull anyways. So it's a cache for a period of time, right?
Okay, so if that hash was included I guess, I don't know, either the credential itself or the service account information or whatever, that would probably be sufficient. Okay, so we're probably okay there then.
I think so.
And what is the state of the Ensure secret image pools?
It's supposed to be in the current RDAX release 129.
Like as an alpha?
Yes.
Okay, so it's still new, but okay.
Yeah. Paco's working on the persistence part. I finished the Ensure part. It just needs to be rebased.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so I guess maybe I would go back to some, like, my original question. Do we want to have changes in the pod or service account that give the credential provider access to dynamic information per workload for it to do something? Would we instead want to have a more, I don't know, implicit API where we like just pass in like the pod labels and annotations and be like, you figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, just for the purposes of incrementally experimenting with this, it seems like the credential provider config change to request audience tokens with specific audiences is useful. We should do that, see how far people get. There are ways that a credential provider plugin can find annotations and for either pods or service accounts. For example, by looking at the
API.
So right now, credential provider, I don't believe, provides the pod name, which is where we got jammed. And also why the node feature for their own web server, you look and they were asking what an additional use case would be. Well, if this came about, the additional use case would be, I'm a credential provider. I want to read the pod, so I know the service account and potentially annotations on it.
Yeah. And the annotations that are not currently included in that API proposal, because
yeah, but like it's pretty clear here, there's a secondary utility to it, which would serve the original need.
So the pod name is in the token.
Yeah, pod name.
You could prototype it with just that, and it is gross. I totally agree.
Does that mean if the kubelet is starting 10 different pods for the same service account, it's going to be creating a token for every pod? Seems like it is.
Indeed.
Yeah, it should be.
I guess it's already doing that. Now it would be doing that twice. Once for the token it's going to mount into the pod, and for the token it's going to pass to the image pool.
I mean, if that was a concern, we could figure out how to single flight that call, right?
Yeah,
they'll have different audiences.
I guess you can't. Not the audience part. It's the fact that the pod UID is different.
Pod UID is different. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no way to single flight it because the inputs are always different.
So if we do it automatically, it's doubling the number of tokens the kubelet creates, I think.
Only in cases when configured. So for instance, you would only do it if you're trying to hit a registry that was configured to do this, because not all registries would want this.
Yeah, we could certainly make it opt-in at the kubelet credential provider level. That part is fine because that's like a one-time config on your kubelet.
Maybe this is a case for the node bound tokens, actually. I think it might be. So today, when the kubelet gets a service account token, it binds it to a particular pod.
Yes.
If the kubelet is being asked to pull images, would a node bound token for the service account? But then you wouldn't have the pod information in claims that you were just saying you would, Mike.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I also don't know. I was thinking that the node bound tokens are going to be in addition to pod binding. So I didn't realize that we had.
There's two variations.
There's two modes. One is you get something bound to a pod, it gets node information added in as well. So if it's bound to a pod, it's also bound to a node. So that token would get a node name and you would claim. So you have node information as well. Something like this, where what we actually care about is the service account, the intersection of the service account and the node.
Yeah, that could make sense.
But
Yeah, we
so
don't have-
the possibility of creating a token bound just to a node scope is also there. It's not used today. It doesn't exist today, but I have to think more about what that means for like revocation and the node authorizer letting a kubelet create a token like that. I'm not sure. One thing that would be helpful to call out in the design is whether we're trying to connect these to service accounts or to pods. If it was connected to the service account, that could open up possibilities for the kubelet, pulling the images for 100 different pods. As long as they're the same service account, it could reuse the same token. But then the credential provider would not have pod information. It would just have service account information. I don't know if
I think that's the intent, though.
Well, I think it depends on what your image registry is doing.
Yeah,
right?
I'm
that
not-
would totally be enough for OpenShift, but I could certainly see someone creating a meta API of sorts and wanting a specific pod user to associate.
I mean, like the things you were talking about earlier, like looking up annotations on a pod as a side channel for additional information. Like when I pull an image with this service account for this pod, because of the annotations, I'm going to do it with this client ID or something.
That
pod,
certainly,
yeah.
I could certainly imagine a David under a different set of forces wanting to do something like that. So I wouldn't want to preclude it if we went to the trouble.
Just say evil David. It's cleaner.
But I guess since we're building something that new and no one is relying on anything yet.
As soon as you put a bit in the credential provider to say, give me a service account token for an audience, whatever we mint that service account token as to start, if we mint it pod bound, I guarantee you.
Right, no, I 100% agree with you there.
We'll start relying on it being pod bound. So,
no, my argument is, then let's not pod bind it. Let's only service account bind it.
That precludes a wide set of use cases that I would.
Can we be a little more specific? What is the use case exactly? Like, is it that I want different?
I am writing an image registry that really cares about how its image gets used and has access to a Cube API and thus wants to look and see what command is getting run. Like I don't know what they'll use it for, but if the only concern is number of token requests, I can appreciate that will double them, but that's doubling them during the initial pull. It's not doubling.
That's true. You don't have to keep refreshing it.
Yeah. So over the lifespan of a pod, we have added potentially one more token request. That doesn't feel so over the top that I would want to trade future functionality I can't consider for it.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's very reasonable. Okay. So what we're saying is we would probably build in some mechanism for a kubelet credential provider to opt in to say, hey, when I do get invoked, I want a token that looks like this for the service account / pod that's about to be run. And I will figure out the rest for now.
Scoping it to credential provider is the easiest thing to reason about. If the node kept to ensure secret pulled images makes progress, then having that be implicit and not representing that in the API could be reasonable.
Okay.
So
And our answer to anyone that needs more data is give your kubelet credential provider access to the Kubernetes API or the kubelet API and look it up through there.
yeah, what I was going to ask is it's a little challenging because this is an SIG-Auth plugin, right? So it can't sit around holding informers, or it would be a bad idea for it to do that, right? Does it make sense to make it work more like
make a
kubelet?
gRPC call, right, to the UDS of the kubelet and be like, hey, I see this pod. What you got, man?
It could do that, yeah. And also, we're talking about a temporary or like an incremental solution. So if it turns out everybody's looking at pod annotations, then it makes sense for us to eventually plump pod annotations. So this isn't intended to be a, you know, by no means should we consider this to be a permanent state of how this works. It just allows us to start building prototypes and seeing where people need to go for additional information. Then we can make it easier or pass that information automatically in the future.
Yeah, I suppose to your point to here on the informer thing, nothing prevents a credential plugin from running a co-located daemon set that caches information locally for use
Yeah,
by the credential provider when it gets exec. So you could have a long-lived process that's holding on to the state, and the credential provider just when it wakes up is like, hey, I have this pod. Tell me about the pod. Cool, thanks. And I'm done.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and then at that point, you could probably imagine this being built via a custom resource, like a controller that purely watches its own custom resource that contains like first-class fields for all the things that you actually need. And it just makes them available basically on the disk in some way, shape, or form for the credential provider to access. That could work. I mean, that doesn't seem so bad. Like, I don't know if we're really asking someone to build something outrageous then. Okay. I think I'm good on this topic. My hope is that or sometime this year I'll have a cap open for this to start work in like 1:30, basically.
All right, cool. You have 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
Let's just punt this. It's all right. We don't we can just talk about it next time. I've had plenty of topics.
Awesome, sounds good. Cool. Then let's wrap things up. Thank you everybody. See you on the 25th.
Well, sure.